is this whole, in the largest sense, this is about the issue of race in the United States, which has been a contentious issue ever since the 1600s, ever since this continent was first colonized by Europeans who had brought unwilling Africans with them to hold in slavery, and then began killing Native Americans in order to take their land. I mean, this is the history of Europeans on North America. It's a history of genocide, murder, rape, enslavement. And I don't think any rational person would deny that. But I got to tell you how far this has gone. Judd Legum is writing about this today in his newsletter, popular.info, his popular information newsletter. North Dakota, just this week, signed, Governor Doug Burgum, the Republican governor of North Dakota, just signed an anti-critical race theory law. You may not teach critical race theory in our elementary and secondary schools. In other words, public schools, no, you can't do it. Which is kind of weird because it wasn't being done, right? There is no critical race theory being taught in any school anywhere in the United States outside of law school. I mean, this is a law school course. It has to do with how laws are constructed in ways that perpetuate racism, things like redlining, for example. That's the kind of stuff they study in critical race theory. But the law redefines it. The law that they signed says, and I quote from the law, "For purposes of this section, critical race theory means the theory that racism is not merely the product of learned individual bias or prejudice, but that racism is systematically embedded in American society and the American legal system to facilitate racial inequality." And you can't, end of quote, and you can't teach about that. A school district or public school not include instruction relating to critical race theory or any portion of the district's required curriculum or any other curriculum offered by the district or school. So now in North Dakota, high school students may not learn what redlining is or was. It's illegal. Perhaps more interesting, and by the way, 28 states have introduced bills that are similar to this, and let's see, so far this year, 28 states, and 8 states have already passed laws similar to North Dakota's. So this is not some weird outlier thing. This is happening. So what does this mean? Well, in North Dakota, there's a whole bunch of land that was taken from the Sioux and the Arapaho. And back in 1868, there was a treaty between the Sioux, the Arapaho, and the United States government that designated the Black Hills of North Dakota as, quote, unceded Indian territory for the exclusive use of Native people, end quote. And then people ignored it, and they just took that land. In some cases, it was, just private white people. In other cases, it was the state of North Dakota. And in some cases, it was the federal government. And so in 1980, this went before the United States Supreme Court in a case called the United States versus Sioux Nation of Indians in 1980. And the Supreme Court ruled, and I'm quoting from that ruling, quote, that the U.S. had illegally appropriated the Black Hills, end quote. And the Supreme Court awarded these two Native American tribes, they awarded them $100 million in reparations. Now, the Native Americans said, no thanks, we don't want your money, we want the land. And this is still, in some ways, kind of up in the air. But that story I just told you, this is the actual history of North Dakota, may not be taught in North Dakota public schools any longer. How does this further having and informed and you know, well-informed, intelligent, thoughtful populace? How does preventing this kind of history, preventing our children from learning it, do anything? How, you know, in North Dakota schools now, it is illegal to teach that there was a time in the United States prior to 1954 when every school in the country was segregated. Basically, every public facility was segregated. It's now arguably illegal to teach in North Dakota. The Brown versus Board of Education, 1954 case. It's illegal to teach the Plessy versus Ferguson case. It's illegal to teach the history of slavery. This is critical race theory. You may not, in North Dakota and 7 other states now, you may not discuss how the law perpetuated racism, segregation, discrimination, redlining. You may not discuss it. What the hell are these white people so afraid of? I mean, what's next? Is the next thing going to be, we can't teach critical gender theory? You know, I mentioned last week was my 49th wedding anniversary, or mine and Louise's, and you know, we were married in 72. In 1972, Louise could not get a credit card without my signature. Now, I don't know if that was the law or if it was the policy of the credit card companies, but they actually made a law in 73 that undid that. But women couldn't sign contracts. In 1972, a woman couldn't legally get an abortion in most parts of the United States. This was the year before Roe v. Wade, the year we got married. So is what's coming next that you're going to have a bunch of white men writing laws that say, you may not teach the history of legal discrimination against women. You may not teach that there was a time when women couldn't vote in the United States. That all changed in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. You may not teach that. Is that next? What else don't they want us to know? They don't want us to know the history of racial discrimination and slaughter, frankly, in the United States. They don't want us to know the legal rationalizations that were used for it. Because why? Because the whites, I mean, let's just tell the truth about this. White supremacists in these states do not want their children, let me rephrase that. White supremacists in these states want their children to grow up to also be white supremacists. And at a certain level, if you have any intelligence or compassion or understanding of, you know, or consideration for your fellow human being, that means that you can't know the history. Because if you did, you'd say, whoa, this is wrong. I'm just boggled by this. By the way, the state legislator who authored this law is a fellow by the name of, where'd it go here? Casper, K-A-S-P-E-R, Congressman Casper, or Representative Casper. And Casper, and Judd Legum notes in his newsletter today at popular.info, Casper and the 7 co-sponsors of the legislation banning teaching basically anything having to do with the racial history of the United States as it applies to law have received political action committee contributions from Marathon Petroleum, the National Association of Realtors, BNSF, Caterpillar, and Bayer, the pharmaceutical company. It's amazing. I mean, this is just absolutely amazing. You've got, for example, North Dakota Senator Nicole Pullman. She's a Republican. She's also a public school teacher. And she says, you know, yeah, we don't teach this in our schools, but she voted for the law anyway because she's a Republican. and she wants to get reelected. She said, if we can do something to reassure parents that in public schools we are not having a political agenda, then I think we should do that. How is teaching the history of race a political thing? Unless one party is taking the position that white supremacy should be the law of the land? How else does it become a political thing? What am I missing here? It's just amazing. One of the Democratic legislators pointed out, you know, that we're just doing this because Tucker Carlson said we should. Is that how we're going to do? We're going to make law now in the field? Some crazy on top says do it. We're going to do it? Really? Amazing.